Imagine being tied down, your arms stretched and your body restrained so you cannot move. Before you, executioners stand calmly, their faces grim but determined, as they begin to turn the handle of a great wooden crank. With each slow, deliberate motion, the winch creaks. Rope is pulled tighter, and with it, something far worse, your very intestines, dragged out from your body, slowly, methodically, coiled around the spindle like rope on a ship. Subscribe to Untold Realities if you are new here. Imagine this. The year is 303 AD. Across the vast Roman Empire, from the windswept shores of Britannia to the scorching deserts of Syria, a new imperial edict has just been nailed to every city gate. The message is stark, uncompromising. Christian churches must be razed to the ground, their sacred scriptures burned to ash, their clergy arrested without mercy. It's an order designed to crush a burgeoning faith, to reassert the absolute dominance of Rome's ancient gods and its emperor. In a quiet harbor town called Formia, nestled on Italy's picturesque west coast, a Christian bishop named Erasmus has already spent 7 grueling years as a fugitive. He's been hiding in the cold, damp solitude of mountain caves, surviving on bitter wild herbs, sleeping under a relentless frost. But his time in the shadows is over. Today he's dragged back into the bustling forum, into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Now picture the Roman soldiers guarding him. These aren't fresh recruits. These are hardened legionaries, men who've seen the brutal realities of war, who've watched countless gladiatorial contests where men were fed to leopards without so much as a blink. Yet today their posture is different. They shift their weight uneasily, their eyes darting, betraying a palpable tension. Why? Because a chilling whisper has spread through the crowd, reaching even their battle-scarred ears. The governor, Maximianus, plans something truly unprecedented, an execution so utterly obscene, so profoundly horrifying, that it will make the bloodthirsty crowd long for the comparatively swift mercy of the lions. By nightfall, these very soldiers, the iron-willed enforcers of Roman might, will be openly vomiting into their helmets, their stoicism shattered. And the name Erasmus? It will be carved into the very windlasses of ships across the entire empire, a grim, powerful testament to his final agony. Stick with me until the very end, and you'll understand why, even centuries later, sailors still bless those windlasses. Why they carry relics of this man, and why, for generations, mothers have pressed a small piece of him against a child's aching stomach. This isn't just history, it's a story etched into the very fabric of human endurance. Section 1, The World That Hated Christians. Diocletian's Rome, at its core, was a machine built for order, efficiency, and absolute conformity. Every single citizen, from the humble baker kneading dough to the skilled bricklayer stacking stones, from the grizzled harbor pilot navigating treacherous waters to the most esteemed senator, was expected to perform their civic duty, to sacrifice to the emperor and the ancient Roman gods. This wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a profound act of loyalty, a public declaration of allegiance to the state. Refusal wasn't merely impious, it was treason, a direct challenge to the very foundation of imperial authority, and that in Rome carried the gravest of penalties. For decades, Christianity had been, at best, grudgingly tolerated, often viewed with suspicion as a strange, secretive cult. But by 303 AD, something significant had changed. The faith had exploded in numbers, growing exponentially across all strata of Roman society. You had slaves, the lowest rung, kneeling alongside powerful senators, even members of the elite Praetorian Guard, all bowing to a crucified Jew from a distant province. This rapid growth, coupled with their unwavering monotheism and refusal to participate in imperial cults, made Christians appear not just peculiar, but dangerously subversive. They were seen as an empire within an empire, a direct threat to the meticulously ordered Roman way of life. It was Diocletian's co-emperor, the fiercely anti-Christian Galerius, who truly fanned the flames of persecution. He argued with growing vehemence that the empire was teetering on the brink of civil war, its unity undermined by the stubborn, growing sect. For Galerius, terror wasn't just a tool, it was the answer. the only way to reassert control. And so, the Great Persecution began, a systematic campaign of terror unlike any seen before. The edicts rolled out with chilling precision. Edict 1. All Christian churches across the empire were to be immediately torn down, their sacred structures reduced to rubble. Edict 2. All clergy, from bishops like Erasmus down to humble deacons, were to be arrested and jailed without trial. Edict 3, perhaps the most insidious, demanded that every single person offer incense and sacrifice to the Roman gods, or face a complete loss of their civil rights, a terrifying prospect in a society where citizenship was paramount. The net was tightening, slowly, inexorably, around every Christian. In Formia, the small Christian community lived under a suffocating cloud of fear. Bishop Erasmus, however, remained steadfast. He kept baptismal water ready in a private house chapel, a symbol of hope and continuity amidst the encroaching darkness. He knew firsthand the brutality of the regime. His own blacksmith, a man he likely knew well, had already been dragged to the rack, his body stretched and tormented for the simple refusal to forge an iron statue of Jupiter. The stakes were impossibly high. Yet even in this climate of terror, rumors about Erasmus persisted, whispered from house to house. They said he could heal, that his touch brought solace. Fishermen, hardy men of the sea, swore he had once raised a drowned boy back to life, a miracle that cemented his reputation among the faithful. So when the time came for him to slip away at night, seeking refuge in the mountains, the entire Christian quarter of Formia didn't just passively watch. They lit candles in their upper windows, a constellation of defiant pinpricks of light in the encroaching darkness, guiding him silently to the hills. It was an act of profound faith and desperate hope, a silent prayer that their shepherd would return. Section 2. The man who would not burn Erasmus when he first sought refuge in those mountains was a man in his 40s. His skin, olive tone from years under the Mediterranean sun, bore the mark of a past life, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, a childhood memento from a slingstone game gone wrong. It was a small detail, but it hinted at a life lived, a person with a history beyond just his sacred office. In the rugged, windswept mountains above the Gulf of Gaeta, he forged a new existence, one of stark solitude and profound spiritual discipline. He survived on the wild fennel he foraged in the sustenance of constant prayer, his days marked by the meticulous copying of psalms onto scraps of parchment, which he then carefully hid inside the hollow trunks of ancient cypress trees. These weren't just words, they were lifelines, anchors in a sea of isolation. The stories that later grew around him spoke of angels bringing him water, celestial beings easing his harsh existence. But the reality, as often happens, was far colder, far more grueling. He melted snow in a bronze bowl, the chills seeping into his bones, a constant reminder of his precarious survival. 7 long years passed in this manner, years of self-imposed exile, of constant communion with the divine. Then a dream broke through the monotony of his survival. It was vivid, urgent, a ship's mast cracking under an unseen force, sailors crying out in desperate fear, and then a clear, unmistakable voice cutting through the chaos, commanding him, "Go back! Your city is the ship." It was a divine summons, a call to return to the very danger he had fled. He descended from the mountains, barefoot, his once neat beard now matted and wild, his eyes burning with an intensity that only comes to those who have spoken out loud to God for too long, who have wrestled with their faith in the crucible of isolation. He carried with him an aura, a quiet power. Within hours of his return to Formia, the news of his presence spread like wildfire among the Christian community. And just as quickly, the healing began again. A young girl, feverish and fading, found solace and recovery in his presence. A sailor, his fingers crushed in a maritime accident, felt his pain subside, his hope rekindled. Word inevitably raced to the urban prefect, a man whose patience for Christian defiance had long since worn thin. Soldiers, their torches flickering ominously, burst into the candlelit house where Erasmus was ministering. But instead of fear, they found a scene of profound calm. Erasmus, in the midst of a Eucharistic prayer, simply finished the sacred ritual. He wiped the wine from his lips, a gesture of quiet dignity, and then, without a word of protest, offered his wrists for the chains. He was taken to the dungeon, a place that reeked of salt and rust, a grim testament to forgotten suffering. Yet even there his spirit remained unbroken. He sang psalms, his voice echoing through the stone corridors, a defiant melody of faith, until other prisoners, broken by their own despair, begged for silence, hoping for the fleeting mercy of sleep. He was a man who quite simply would not be extinguished. Section 3, the warm-up tortures. Governor Maximianus was not interested in a quick, clean martyrdom. That he knew often backfired, merely creating a new hero for the Christians to rally around. No, Maximianus wanted a spectacle, a prolonged, agonizing display designed to break the man, and more importantly, to crush the spirit of his followers. He wanted Erasmus to recant, to scream for mercy, to betray his God in the most public and humiliating way possible. The first round of torture was designed to inflict excruciating pain without immediate death. Bronze claws, sharp and unforgiving, tore at Erasmus's back, flaying his skin. Then hot tar was poured into the raw wounds, followed by the terrifying kiss of flame. Legend, often eager to soften the edges of such horrors, claims that the flames miraculously bent sideways, licking at the cold stone wall instead of consuming his flesh, causing the jailer's wife, witnessing the horror, to faint dead away. The reality was undoubtedly more brutal, a searing agony that would have broken lesser men. Yet Erasmus endured. Next came the spiked barrel. A crude, terrifying invention, Erasmus was shoved inside, sealed within its claustrophobic confines, and then rolled downhill, the internal spikes gouging and tearing at his body with every rotation. The wood groaned, splitting under the strain, and somehow, miraculously, he crawled out, bleeding and broken, but undeniably alive. Each escape, each survival, only fueled the growing whispers among the populace. This man was either truly blessed or possessed of an unnatural resilience. The third round was a more subtle, yet equally cruel form of torment. He was returned to prison, this time placed in a cell where the floor was ankle-deep in jagged, broken potsherds. Every movement was agony, every step a fresh wound. Each dawn the guards, jaded and accustomed to finding corpses, expected to see him dead. Yet each dawn they found him alive, his feet swollen like loaves of bread, reciting the Beatitudes. His voice a quiet, unwavering testament to his faith. The sheer endurance was baffling, infuriating to his tormentors. Outside the jail, the morbid fascination grew. Crowds gathered, and soon a grim form of entertainment emerged. People began to gamble on which torture would finally break him. They speculated on the rack, the whip, the branding iron. No one, however, had yet breathed a word about intestines or windlasses. That particular, unimaginable horror was still being meticulously sketched on a wax tablet in the prefect's office. A chilling blueprint for an agony never before conceived. The true nightmare was yet to begin. Section 4. The invention of a new agony. Governor Maximianus, frustrated by Erasmus's unwavering resilience, understood that the standard Roman repertoire of punishment was failing him. Rome already boasted a truly terrifying catalog of executions. There was crucifixion, a slow public agony designed to humiliate and deter. There was damnatio ad bestias, where the condemned were thrown unarmed to wild beasts in the arena, a brutal form of entertainment. And then, the particularly grisly cullis, where a patricide was sewn into a sack with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, then hurled into water, a punishment so specific and horrifying it barely bears thinking about. But here was the problem. These Christians, infuriatingly, kept singing while they died. They met their end with a quiet dignity, sometimes even joy, turning their executions into powerful testimonies of faith rather than deterrence. Fear itself, the very cornerstone of Roman control, was failing to break them. Maximianus needed something more, something that would scramble courage, something that would not only inflict unimaginable physical pain, but also shatter the will, something so grotesque that even the martyr's own mother would beg him to apostatize, to renounce his faith just to make it stop. So, Maximianus called in his engineers, the ingenious, if morally bankrupt, minds behind Rome's impressive infrastructure and its equally impressive instruments of war and torture. He challenged them to devise a new form of agony. An Alexandrian soldier, perhaps having witnessed something truly barbaric during his campaigns, sketched a device he'd seen used on pirates. A wooden drum with crank handles designed to stretch a man's limbs until his joints popped, dislocating bone from socket. It was a crude but effective instrument of torment. The proclamation was read, echoing through the square, leaving a horrified silence in its wake. The bishop, Erasmus, would recant his faith, or his insides would be reeled out of him, slowly, deliberately, like an anchor cable from a ship's hold. The date was set for the Ides of the month, a day of ill omen. The entire coastal population was not just invited, but ordered to attend, to bear witness to this new unspeakable. Section 5, the Forum of Disembowelment. Dawn broke hot and heavy for a May morning. The air in the Forum was thick with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Roman soldiers, their faces impassive beneath their helmets, formed an unyielding perimeter, shield edges touching, a silent, unbreachable wall around the central plaza. Merchants, ever opportunistic, jostled for better vantage points on their balconies overlooking the square, their usual cries muted by the somber atmosphere. Mothers, some with a morbid curiosity, others perhaps compelled by fear, hoisted their children onto their shoulders for a clearer view, unknowingly exposing them to a sight that would haunt their young minds for years. Erasmus stood roped to a sturdy wooden post, stripped to the waist. His ribs, sharply defined, showed like the weathered planks of a ship's hull, a stark testament to his years of hardship and deprivation. The prefect Maximianus offered one last cynical chance, a final act of theatrical mercy. "Pour wine to the gods, Erasmus," he intoned, his voice booming across the hushed square. "Keep your life. Return to your senses." Erasmus, however, was past earthly fear. His voice, though perhaps weakened by hunger and torture, rang out, clear and strong enough for even the back rows to hear his defiant reply. "I have one altar, and it is the body of Christ. Do quickly what you will do slowly." A centurion, a man who had burned entire villages in Dacia, who had nailed men naked to crosses without so much as a flicker of emotion, suddenly felt a surge of stomach acid climb his throat. This was different. This was beyond the brutality he understood, the brutality of war and conquest. This was something new, something fundamentally perverse. The iron hooks, cold and sharp, went in. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the first turn of the windlass crank lifted Erasmus slightly. His skin, stretched taut, tented outwards, a horrifying preview of what was to come. With the third turn, the true horror began to unfold. Pink loops, glistening wetly in the harsh morning sunlight, appeared slowly, inexorably, emerging from his abdomen. The crowd noise, which had been a low, morbid murmur, dimmed to a single, guttural, animal moan of collective revulsion. Children, their faces contorted in terror, were quickly passed back through the throng, hands clamped over their ears, their innocence shattered. The soldiers themselves, the hardened enforcers of Roman will, stood transfixed, their eyes wide with a dawning horror, staring at the unspeakable act that their own hands, their own orders, were operating. 70 turns. 70 agonizing turns of the windlass. And Erasmus, somehow, incredibly, was still whispering prayer. Witnesses, their voices trembling with the memory, would later swear they heard him naming the disciples one by one, his final act in intimate communion with his God. When the windlass was finally cranked to its absolute limit, the sky above Formia had shifted, the clouds bruised purple, reflecting the darkness below. A surgeon, cold and professional, stepped forward, checked for a pulse. There was none. He signaled, and the body, now a grotesque husk, was cut down. There was no cheering, no triumphant roar from the crowd. Instead, only the hollow, almost obscene clink of coins on stone as gamblers, their bets forgotten, scattered in disgust. A legionary, unable to hold back, vomited violently, desperately trying to conceal his shame and revulsion inside his helmet. The prefect Maximianus had expected applause, a resounding affirmation of his power. Instead, he received only the hollow clop of horses shifting uneasily, the profound, unsettling silence of a crowd utterly broken by what they had witnessed. The spectacle had worked, but not in the way he intended. Section 6. Aftermath and Irony. The official plan, once the gruesome spectacle was complete, was to simply scatter Erasmus's remains beyond the city limits, to feed them to dogs, ensuring no sacred burial, no focal point for Christian veneration. But the prefect's gruesome display had backfired spectacularly, creating not fear, but a profound, defiant empathy. Under the cloak of night, a group of brave fishermen, their hearts heavy with grief and reverence, wrapped what they could of the bishop's body in sailcloth. They carried him secretly to the cliffs overlooking the sea, bearing him reverently beside the old lighthouse, a beacon in the darkness, just as he had been a beacon of faith. Within weeks, stories, potent and defiant, began to sprout like wildflowers after a spring rain. Candles left at his impromptu grave were said to relight themselves. Sails hanging limp on masts were rumored to billow without a whisper of wind, carrying ships safely to port. These were not just tales, they were acts of resistance, a community's way of reclaiming their saint from the clutches of Roman cruelty. Diocletian's great persecution, brutal and relentless, ground on for another 8 agonizing years. Yet the stomach of Rome, its collective conscience, was already turning, sickened by the excesses. The martyrs, far from being silenced, had become powerful, eloquent voices in their death. By 312 AD, a seismic shift occurred. Emperor Constantine, marching under the Chi, the symbol of Christ, claimed victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The following year, 313 AD, saw the Edict of Milan, a landmark decree that legalized Christianity, transforming it from a persecuted cult into a recognized, even favored, religion of the empire. The very empire that tried to eradicate it would soon embrace it. And Erasmus, the man whose guts were reeled out like an anchor cable, the victim of Rome's most perverse cruelty, he became the patron saint of gut pain. The irony is as profound as it is poignant. Sailors who had witnessed his horrific end shortened his name to Elmo, transforming him into Saint Elmo. They nailed his image to their masts, praying to him when Saint Elmo's fire, that eerie electric glow, danced on their rigging, a phenomenon once seen as an ill omen, now a sign of protection. In countless Renaissance paintings, Saint Elmo is depicted, not in agony, but with a serene smile, often carrying a miniature windlass in his hand, as if to say with quiet triumph, "Yes, they invented a machine to tear me apart, but I invented a story that travels farther and endures longer than any Roman fleet ever could." His suffering, intended to erase him, instead immortalized him, transforming a brutal execution into a symbol of enduring faith and hope. Conclusion: why we still talk about him. History, if it teaches us anything, is full of empires, grand and terrible, that believed cruelty was a universal language, a dialect of power that everyone would instinctively understand and obey. But martyrs like Erasmus, through their unwavering defiance, prove that sometimes that very dialect breaks the linguist. Sometimes the victim, in their final agonizing moments, transcends the brutality, transforming the instrument of their destruction into a megaphone for their message. Battle-hardened Roman soldiers wept that day, not just at the sight of gore, for they had seen plenty. They wept because they recognized, perhaps too late, that the thing they were trying so desperately to erase, whether you call it faith, hope, conviction, or simply the indomitable human spirit, was already outside the body. It was unspooling into the very air, intangible, uncontainable, and utterly impossible to recapture or destroy. The execution, intended to be a final, crushing blow, became instead a powerful, resonant echo. So the next time you see a ship's windlass turning, raising an anchor, or hauling a sail, remember Erasmus. Remember how one man, in the face of unspeakable horror, turned that very machine, designed for his destruction, into a megaphone. Its echo, a testament to resilience and faith, crossed oceans and centuries, far outlasting the empire that sought to silence him. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something within you, please share it with someone who might think pain always wins, who believes that cruelty is the ultimate victor. History, with stories like Erasmus's, says otherwise. Like this video, subscribe for more untold realities, and drop a comment below about which historical horror or incredible story you want us to unpack next. Until then, keep your eyes open. Legends are often quieter than lions, but trust me, they travel much, much farther.